Nawaz Sharif was not getting along well with his army chief. I am also getting news that the Prime Minister and the Pakistan Army Chief are not getting along well with each other. The kind of political framework that you have in Pakistan, that the Army Chief dictates terms to the Prime Minister, unlike our country. Army is far behind. Why? Because most of the work that the Army needs was being done by the DRDO. In my time also, Krishna, let me be very candid about it. I believe that every Indian nation, Indian
citizen,
person, a citizen, has got total patriotism in his heart. No, earlier we did not trust them. But I believe that that is a wrong thing. We have to trust our own people. And therefore, there is absolutely no harm in incorporating them in whatever defense needs that we have today. You can do a lot with diplomacy. But of course, you can do a lot more with firmness and force. If you need to exploit your success on the task that has been given to you, you can do that. You should do that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the KVKurious Podcast. We have a very honorable guest today. It's General Ved Malik, who is being decorated with the Param Vishisht Seva Medal and the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal. General Ved was formerly the Chief of Army during the Kargil War. And in this conversation, we walk through General Ved's experiences navigating through the Kargil War and in general, his life as a soldier. We also speak about how the future of defense technology should look like and how can citizens like us and startups contribute to accelerate the pace at which innovation happens in the defense sector. So I hope you enjoy this thoroughly refreshing take and conversation with General Ved Malik on the KVKurious Podcast. Hello, General Malik. Thank you. Thanks a lot for being on my podcast. Quite a privilege to be hosting you. Looking forward to learning more from your journey and your thoughts on defense tech and how the Indian startup scene could contribute more to the future of defense.
Good morning, Krishna. Thank you for asking me to join you on this broadcast. Looking forward to your interviewing me.
Sure. So I was actually going through the abstract of your book, India's Military Decisions. And there, one of the key things mentioned in the abstract is, regardless of whatever happened, one of the Kargil event remains an unalloyed version or a representation of the heroism of our country, especially during those grim weeks. Just want to highlight a bit more on that. What do you mean by grim weeks back in the day? And how do you think situation has either improved or changed over 2 decades since then?
Krishna, Kargil, we were surprised. We had no clues when the war began, who were the intruders and what were they up to. And politically as well as militarily, I must say, that we were totally surprised and it was quite unexpected. So the first few weeks of that war, we were still trying to find out what is the seriousness of that adverse situation in which we had been placed. The intruders had entered our area and they were occupying certain heights in a very remote area, a very difficult terrain. So that was the situation. And in my book, that's why I said surprise, from surprise to victory. But after a couple of weeks, when we managed to get hold of the situation as to what it is and what it implies for us politically as well as militarily, then we took very strong action. And as you know, at the end of it, we managed to defeat the Pakistan army and achieve the political aim that was before us and the military mission that was given to us by the Cabinet Committee of Security. So that is why I have said that from surprise to victory, because first 2 weeks were difficult. They were in a very difficult situation. But then thereafter, when we prepared ourselves and when we launched ourselves, then we started seeing the victory. and we achieved that. Um, I think the credit goes to the entire nation as a whole. The political guidance, the political mission given to us, the guidance given to us throughout, um, the armed forces, particularly the lower level of our command, they displayed excellent bravery, leadership, junior leadership, and also the nation, the way in which we got this support from the whole nation, from north to south, east to west. And that was also very encouraging and morale boosting for us. So I give the credit for that victory after those first 3 weeks, which were really difficult for us situation, and not only for us but for the whole nation also, I would say. And but nation fought as a whole, and we achieved what was desired.
So in those 2 to 3 weeks, sir, initially when you say it was a surprise, we weren't aware of much of the, the motive behind, or where exactly the troops are, or what exactly the scenario is, how to combat this. From there to actually getting clarity, was there a certain inflection point where you realized, okay, this is it, and this is the target that these people are coming with, and this might be the right way to hit them back?
Yes, there is always an inflection point, when you are dealing with such a situation. And, initially I was abroad. I had gone on a foreign assignment given by the cabinet. And that is where I learned that this is what is happening on our northern borders. When I came back, then I visited the border areas. I spoke to the commanders at their different levels of brigade, division, corps, and command. And then I also consulted my own colleagues in the army as well as from the Air Force and the Navy. And then we realized that, look, this is not, these are not the jihadis who have entered our territory. That is what the intelligence agencies were telling us all the time, that these are all militants, jihadi militants who have come. And, we have different rules of engagement when you are dealing with those jihadis, and different rules of engagement when you are dealing with the regular force from the other country. And so that was the time when I decided that we needed to change our rules of engagement. And that is when I gave the presentation to the Cabinet Committee of Security and told them that, look, all three services will be participating together. And this is not a minor incursion. This is a major one. And we still do not know what is in the mind of Pakistani leaders, political as well as military. So we will be taking military action, both for defensive as well as we will be preparing ourselves for defensive as well as offensive operations.
Got it. So on one end, when you were preparing for these military defenses or even offensive operations, but since you mentioned there could have also been some level of political motive behind this, do you think the involvement of a strategic or a diplomatic discussion could also have been part of the process to combat this?
Yes, there are certain. Actually, you must understand this, that when you are in a conflict situation like this, then there is a political mandate given to the military. After all, military is an instrument of the politics of the country. The country is the same. We are only an instrument in their hand. And when you explain the situation to them and also give the implications of the situation to them, then finally you take the political aim from them. And based on that political aim, you work out your military aim. Based on that, and you work out your military aim and your military strategy for achieving that aim. So you have to be in conversation all the time, not only in the beginning, but I would say even throughout the operation as long as it's going on, because it has to be a very close interaction between the political leadership and the military leadership.
So on some level, would you also put military in a sort of similar plane where, political leadership is also influencing, let's say, civil services, and it also influences military in the sense that part of the military objectives is to align with the political objectives?
Yes, there are consultations. The whole thing depends on the consultation that you have with the military, with the political leadership, as well as with your other civilian colleagues also, who are in charge of the ministries, and on whom you have to depend also, whether it is aviation or railways, or, all these people come into play when the military strategy is being worked out. So it is consultation in which the final word is given by the political authority.
And especially during your tenure, I think you were under two prime ministers, right? During I.K. Gujral and then followed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So given that military at the end of the day consults with the political bodies, did you notice, let's say, any significant difference in terms of the political leadership that you were working with? And how did it really affect the way you were able to sort of dissipate this into the rest of the army operations?
Look, you're asking me about two different leaders, and you're asking me about two different situations also. Now, with Mr. Gujral, I was fortunate that I had very good rapport with both the prime ministers. With Mr. Gujral, the rapport was to such an extent that whenever he spoke to his counterpart in Pakistan, he would tell me as to what all has transpired, particularly if it had any military implications. And he would tell me about it, and obviously then I would give him my own view on that issue. For example, I remember once he told me after his conversation with Nawaz Sharif that Nawaz Sharif was not getting along well with his army chief. It looked to him from that. So he said, he spoke about his army chief, Pakistan army chief, in a very derogatory manner. So I told him, I said, sir, I'm also getting news that the Prime Minister and the Pakistan Army Chief are not getting along well with each other. So this kind of consultation and this kind of assessment is, I would say, more or less joint. No, that was his. He wanted to have peace. In fact, I would say both the Prime Ministers wanted to have peace, and they had their own style of doing it. But there was absolutely no doubt that they wanted to have peace with Pakistan. When Mr. Vajpayee came, if you remember, he also, although we had carried out nuclear tests in his tenure, during his tenure, but he went to Lahore, that famous Lahore declaration in which both the prime ministers agreed that henceforth we will try and resolve all our problems, including Kashmir, peacefully on the table itself. And that was what was his mind. And despite all that, yet we had to face war because the kind of political framework that you have in Pakistan, the army chief dictates terms to the prime minister, unlike our country. So you found that despite the Lahore Declaration signed by the prime ministers of India and Pakistan, the Pakistan army chief decided to launch this operation in Kargil, in Kargil mountains.
So do you think after the Kargil incident, after 2000 or even, let's say, even 2001, the level of investment that we have, investment does not necessarily mean capital investment, but just the effort going into preparedness has increased, and how?
Yeah, it has increased. Let me take step by step.
Sure.
First, of course, we had terrible shortages of weapons when the Kargil War took place. Before that, we were working on almost 70% of our total authorized equipment, arms, ammunition, etc., etc. So the first thing that we realized was that we had to make up all that. We cannot afford to continue with that 70% what we call war wastage reserves. The second thing was on the same issue was that we cannot be dependent on the foreign countries for our import of weapons. because we had the Western nations had placed sanctions on us after the nuclear weapons test. So we were still under those sanctions, and we could not import anything at all from the Western countries. In fact, not only that, there are certain equipment which had gone abroad for repairs, etc. That also could not be brought back. So that was, and even your friends in such situations, when you are placed in such a situation, they like to exploit it, you know. And not only the pricing part, but we also face a situation where you bought equipment, but it was very old. Our ammunition, which was very old, and half of it was dead. So these are the kind of situation that we had. And our government realized that we cannot be totally dependent on so much of import for our defense.
Yeah.
And that is how then subsequently this Atmanirbharta started when Mr. Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister. But the realization was there at that time that, look, you have to achieve self-reliance to the extent it is possible. And you cannot be so dependent on foreign countries.
Got it. Do you think something significantly changed in the Indian landscape that allows for Atmanirbharta to be more relevant now than 10 years ago?
Yes, again, today we are facing not one enemy, but two enemies, two adversaries. You know, situation on the northern border 20 years ago was quite different than it is today. And so today we are facing a much graver situation in terms of security. And it has now been realized by our country, by the government of the country, that we need to be as much self-reliant as possible. A country of our size, of our capability to defend itself, to make sure that our national interests are not compromised, we have to be self-reliant to the extent it is possible. So that is how it is working today. A major step that the government have taken is to bring in the private sector, both for R&D purposes as well as for manufacturing purposes into that. And the private sector enables us to have better import or easier import of technology from other private partners in international arena. So there is a change in the situation when it comes to defense industry in our country is concerned. It is now moving forward, though if you ask me, I would say that it needs to move forward much faster. Even today, our conventional weapons, if you look at it, I think almost about little more than 80% is still the major conventional weapons are from foreign design, either coming from foreign countries or being made in our country under licensed production. So we need to move faster on this, and we cannot be dependent so much on the foreign countries. You know, this has it all depends on the kind of international relations that you have with foreign countries. And international relations, they are dynamic, depending on situation. I mean, you look at after Ukraine war itself, the dynamism of the situation that has now taken place in our relationship. And so you do not know when the war takes place, when you unfortunately have to fight a war, then what will be the situation? So that is why we insist that it is better to have as much self-reliance as possible.
So diving a little more into the involvement of private sector, what is the current scope of interaction between, let's say, the defense forces or the armed forces and the private sector? Is it more of the nature that, let's say, some institutions like DRDO is already working on a certain project, and at best they try to involve the private sector to source the parts and to source whatever is the things that will allow them to accelerate the process of development? Or is it more involved in the sense that defense forces are able to communicate with startups and tell, this is our requirement, these are the challenges, how could you leverage tech to solve this for us in a better way?
both processes are now in force. The DRDO, of course, has been for quite some time making use of the assistance from the private sector. And at that time, let's face it, that the private sector for a very long time did not have enough technology or even the money. So they used to work, the DRDO used to work with them. Today, the private sector has changed a lot. They have enough money today, and they also are in a position to get to import technology from abroad, or work jointly from with foreign companies. So the situation is now improved, particularly as far as the private sector is concerned. Now we have to take advantage of both the situation. So while most of the time we are dependent on the DRDO and other public sector undertakings like the Defense PSU, etc., but there are certain areas where we can also deal through the Ministry of Defense, through the kind of rules and regulations which have been made by the Ministry of Defense, and approach as well as work alongside with the private sector. It is happening, for example, I can give you an example of the artillery guns. So artillery guns are now, some of them are working directly with the DRDO. Some of them are developing on their own, and occasionally they are able to consult the armed forces. Situation has improved a lot since the last 10 years or so, I would say.
Interesting. In any way, do you think it is going to help a lot more to have a tech-specific team within the army and perhaps a more mature one or a more experienced one that allows a lot of this innovation to happen in-house within the defense forces instead of having to collaborate with, let's say, establishments like DRDO?
Look, in this kind of situation, I would say that the Navy is far ahead of us. Navy, right from the beginning, has been doing its own research development work and working for their new, whether it is aircraft carrier or the other warships that they have got, other weapons are concerned. They have been somehow that has come into their it's become part of their organizational culture, I would say. Air Force and Army is far behind. Why? Because most of the work that the Army needs was being done by the DRDO. In my time also, when we wanted to do some work, either import or ask the private sector, the DRDO would tell us, look, don't worry, we will do it for you. I remember in my time, I had worked out on as a chief, we had worked out on a plan for digitization in the armed forces, for the next 8 years or so, I think. So we had worked on that plan. And when we presented that plan, the DRDO told us, no, don't worry, we will be able to do it. I mean, although you had companies like Infosys and others, they had started working for people abroad, but we could not contact them directly because it had to be done through the DRDO. The situation is improving slowly, not fully to our satisfaction. Krishna, let me be very candid about it. I believe that every Indian citizen has got total patriotism in his heart. So there is no question of being secretive about it. You just tell him that, look, this is to be done separately. It cannot be, you have to go by certain confidentiality rules, etc. You tell him that, and he will work for you. No, earlier we did not trust them. But I believe that is a wrong thing. We have to trust our own people. And therefore, there is absolutely no harm in incorporating them in whatever defense needs that we have today.
So what needs to change to allow more of this interaction to happen? Is it more at the strategic level or a policy level, or is it more at the legislative level?
No, it's a policy level. Okay. I don't think it's a policy level. We still, because having worked in a particular manner over such a long time, even today, we are, I find that the Ministry of Defense is hesitant to give the same rules and regulation and give a fair deal to the private sector. We always look at them with suspicion in terms of their profiteering or in terms of security issues, etc., etc. And we are not really giving them a fair deal when it comes to interaction with them or encouraging them to help us more.
Okay, so when we speak of preparedness, having enough ammunition or weaponry is one sort of thing. But having enough, let's say, monitoring systems or communication systems for within the army and with different forces spread across the country is, I think, also a certain level of preparedness. So how do you think is the level of preparedness varying between these two verticals? And what do you think should be the specific improvements in each of these verticals?
Look, first thing, I think over the years, particularly after Kargil War, we have realized that the war is to be fought by the entire nation. That's one. When it comes, a question of military comes, then the three services have to work together. You cannot be working in separate silos, so to say. And that integrated work, that has to be gone into. The military strategy has to be integrated. And thereafter, at the operational level, as much of integration as possible. After all, each service has got its own characteristics. So we have to work on those. But jointmanship is absolutely essential. There is absolutely no. That requires good communication. That requires today certain capabilities which are tri-service. You cannot say, okay, this is for the army and this is for the navy and all. A large number of them, whether it is satellite communication or within the service or with each service, these communications, passing intelligence to each other, getting the help at the shortest possible notice, all these have to be worked together. And therefore, the jointmanship, which includes very good communication, very good rapport, working together, both on the ground as well as off the ground. So that becomes absolutely essential, and people have realized that, and they are working. Even today, when we talk about theatre, integrated theatre command, etc., which the government wants the military to get into, those are all calls for fighting or having this kind of capabilities, integrated capabilities.
I have a very naive question, but just very curious to understand this. As a leader, how do you figure out what is the optimal amount of resources, both manpower and weaponry, that you have to deploy at a certain space, especially when it's more of just being prepared for a certain scenario?
There are two issues involved in this. One is the threat assessment. What kind of threat one foresees, visualizes, both internal security as well as on the external security front. And the second is, what is the money available to you, whether you can, and after all, the weapons, the quantum of the weapons, ammunition, etc., it all depends on the kind of money that you have. And we are restricted by the budget, which is passed every year.
Yeah.
And within that budget, then you have to plan both for long term as well as for short term. So the quantity of your wherewithal depends on the kind of money that has been given to you, not only for 1 year, but over the years. We have 5 years plans, defense plans, and we work accordingly, because one has to look at situation not only just a few years ago, but we have a perspective plan which goes right up to 15 years. So with that, so it depends on both these factors. One is the threat situation, the threat assessment that we have. And the second is the kind of money that has been given to you to make up for the needs that you have, Army, Navy, Air Force, all three put together.
So on some level, what I gather from this is, while you have, let's say, a defensive sort of set up across all borders or whatever the target areas are, the sort of critical factor here becomes, in a moment of crisis, how easily or how quickly can you deploy mobile sources from a certain other location to this location?
Yeah, I want to mention one more factor before that.
Okay.
That acquisition of your capabilities, it cannot be instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long time. That is why you have these perspective plans, say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like that.
Mm-hmm.
So one must keep in mind that you cannot acquire a certain capability just at a very short notice.
Mm.
When the war starts at that time, you can only get something which is available to you at that time. You cannot be saying, "Ke ye hona chahiye." You can't get everything that you need.
Right.
So that is one thing which the whole nation must, every citizen also must remember that even if you give me money at that time, I may not be able to utilize that money.
Right.
When the war starts off. Now, as far as the movement of our personnel as well as our wherewithal, that's a logistic question, and that depends on the kind of terrain and the kind of capability that we have acquired. As far as terrain is concerned, it's the road communication, the rail communication, and as far as the other capabilities are concerned, the Air Force help, how much Air Force can help you to take these. But one has to, in the kind of fighting that takes place, you have to be capable of moving your troops as well as the arms, ammunition, equipment that they require at a short notice. So the capability of moving these things should be as good as one can have.
And how do you think should
can I give you, Krishna, can I give you an example of during Kargil War, for example?
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah.
Although we were that time prepared, we were fighting in Kargil, but we were prepared to take the war on the other front also. We were prepared to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that we went because the government had told us not to cross the border at that time. But, as a military man, one had to be prepared for both situation. So in some cases, we had to move some formations from the rest of from outside Kargil sector. And they went either by road or they were airlifted. And so depending on the situation, certain amount of movement can take place depending again on your assessment, where is the threat and what kind of, how do you visualize it will develop in the next few days.
So when we speak of deployment of troops, personnel and resources, one of the things maybe that has changed in the last 20 years is how much tech has advanced, right? So, and one of the biggest risks that as a country we might be taking is putting the lives of the soldiers at risk in any scenario, for instance. So with the advancement in tech, do you think we are able to optimize or reduce the number of manpower required or the human resources required for a certain operation just by leveraging better tech? Or if not, is there still a bias towards human resources and why?
No, look, firstly, technology is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In fact, you would have probably read that most of the time, the technology has first come from the services, armed forces, and then it has gone to the civil sector in various situations. So because we feel that in warfare, technology is important, whoever has got better technology has got, it's a major advantage with them. Now, and technology is moving very fast, much faster than it did earlier. So we have to cope with that pace also. That is one. But ultimately, it is a facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you a long range, it gives you better accuracy, it gives you situation on the spot. Satellite imagery will tell you as to what is happening in a particular area at all the time. So the technology is giving you all those advantages. And therefore, you must make use of them. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Now, when it comes to technology versus the manpower, that depends from situation to situation. Ultimately, in the army, we say it is the man behind the gun which matters. So, so the man or a woman these days also, so they do matter, and they are the one ultimately who will take a decision based on the information or intelligence that they get, the kind of factors that they have weighed. The other aspect is on the terrain. Now you can make use of technology even better when it comes to plain situation. But when it comes to mountains, for example, technology may not be able to do as much as it can in the plains. Similarly, when it comes to the kind of war that you are having, or the conflict situation you are having, now counterinsurgency, then you do not know who's your adversary and who is not, because they're all wearing civil clothes, etc. So there, the manpower or the woman power these days also. So that becomes more important. So I would say that yes, we must make use of technology as much as it, because it's a very major war winning factor. But we have also to make sure that we have the quality of soldiers, men and women, who can make use of the technology depending on the terrain and depending upon the help that we can take from technology.
Got it. So let's say, sir, let's say hypothetically, I have a certain, weapon idea or maybe a certain mechanism or a product that we've built that could facilitate the army in whatever capacity. What's the best way for me as a civilian to reach out to someone in the army and tell, hey, you might want to try this. Just let us know if it helps you, and we'll be able to discuss further.
Well, you have to approach the Ministry of Defense, and Ministry of Defense has got various departments where you can approach, give them your suggestions there. And, they are also looking for better equipment and all the time. So you don't get into a direct interaction generally with the armed forces. You approach them through the Ministry of Defense, because the acquisition part, and mind you, the Ministry of Defense has made rules which are available on their website, and you can follow those rules, and that kind of interaction is possible today.
Very interesting. At this point, like we understand, we are on some level of tension on the western borders as well as northern borders. And while we might put in all the efforts to sort of be prepared for this on a military level in terms of the armed forces, how do you think can we ease the tensions here on a diplomatic level?
Look, diplomacy and defense, these are two sides of the same coin. And when you have a conflict situation, the task of the diplomacy is to resolve the issue without having to get into war situation. And the defense comes into play when you find that the diplomacy is unable to achieve the aim that was given to it. After all, we have our national interest. So both of us are working for national interest. If you cannot achieve your national interest on a diplomatic level, then finally you have to depend on the other instrument of the government, which is the armed forces. So I would always say that the fighting a war should be the last resort of our whatever dispute that we have with foreigners. At the moment, there are efforts to have better relations both with Pakistan as well as China. But then we have to go by the situation on the ground. At the moment, the ground situation is such that the armed forces have to be prepared for both offensive as well as defensive, particularly defensive operations. And that is what the situation is today, because not only that they are having dispute over our national borders, but there is also the kind of strategic partnership that they have with each other. I would say strategic alliance that they have, that they can both simultaneously at the same time, they can wage a war against you. So we have to prepare for that kind of situation. So say on the northern border, we are permitting the diplomacy to play its role And if we can have peace and try and resolve our dispute on the border as much as possible, to that extent, it's good. But if that doesn't happen, and if the adversary takes action as it did 2 years ago, in Galwan, in those areas and all, then I'm afraid then the armed forces have to play their role.
Interesting. So, it's just sort of zooming out of this entire context. Do you have any thoughts, or do you foresee a World War III kind of scenario?
No, I don't see World War III scenario at the moment, and definitely not our. One is that I think the whole world has realized that the nuclear weapons cannot be used by anybody, because that means destruction of half the world.
Yeah.
So that is a big check on people. The other thing is that fighting a war is not only expensive in terms of lives, but look at the kind of economies that suffers. The whole economy, the development that has taken place over so many years. Now see what has happened to Ukraine today. Ukraine, from a thriving, I've been to Kyiv, for example, from a very thriving upcoming city. Today, most of it outside Kyiv is in ruins, absolutely. So wars are better avoided, and diplomacy must be given its full role. But if it cannot, then of course the armed forces come into play. But one thing I want to mention here, and that is important for everybody to understand, all citizens to understand, that most of the diplomats themselves have agreed that if our security instrument, our defense preparedness is good, then it is easier for them to work for our national interest with the so-called adversary. So I have always said that strong defense means sound diplomacy. Strong defense means.
So on some level, is it like you suggesting that, okay, it's not just, I'm not just prepared to defend, but I'm so prepared that you better not dare to attack me?
Exactly. And this is what has been said by everybody. I'm just giving you a quote from Kofi Annan, which I had noted somewhere. You can do a lot with diplomacy, but of course, you can do a lot more with firmness and force when you have that backing you.
Yeah, it's almost like a parent trying to explain to their kid, and if they don't listen, you end up on applying force. Interesting. So
that is something that is important for people to understand, and for our government also to understand that.
Yeah. So going back to the earlier context where you mentioned, ultimately it's all the man behind the gun. Yes. Now this. Okay, before that, let me just ask you about this sense of responsibility, right? So let's say as an army chief or in any leadership position, when you're making such extreme planned decisions, there could be many cases, many instances where it could just go bust because of whatever unforeseen scenarios, right? But of course, we go with a certain level of preparedness. But how do you sort of get that confidence to yourself, where you take that responsibility and tell, okay, this is going to work, and even if it fails, I am not in a very horrible position, it's okay. Like, how do you bring that sense of calm to yourself?
Well, I'll put it into two parts, your question.
Okay.
The first part is when you do your planning. At that time, you work out on the best possible plan, and you start getting that implemented. But you also keep in mind all the time of contingencies which may occur when your plan has been put into action. You can get into an adverse situation, etc. And for that adverse situation, generally in your plan, you always cater for certain reserves, certain other capabilities up your hand, for example. Like we were fighting Kargil War. So we had given them adequate personnel, arms, ammunition, resources, whatever they wanted. But I had some reserves available with me that in case I cannot undo what they have done, then with this, what will I do? The other thing is that you have plans also worked out for that with your resources that you have. And then you work on a system that how do I create a strategic imbalance in the mind of the adversary. Kargil War, we created that strategic imbalance on Pakistan by threatening them on the other borders of Kashmir as well as the rest of the India, Punjab, Rajasthan, etc., that look, we will end this war on our terms. The Navy moved its ships from Bay of Bengal to Arabian Sea. The Air Force also started working from their forward bases on this thing. So we created that strategic imbalance on their mind. And that is what made the Pakistan Prime Minister start running around. He went to China, he went to USA, etc., because they realized. So that is what has to be in the mind of the in your strategic people at the top level, military mind, I'm telling. That is one aspect of it. The other thing is that it's a human mind. You must have adequate resilience in you. That you should be prepared to take adversity in your stride. If you are weak-hearted and you can't, you can't make a good leader in that case.
Yeah.
Because there will be adverse situations in any operational plan when it gets going, when it is being implemented. And you can't sort of give up any situation, etc. That requires all our leaders, both civilian as well as military, it requires that kind of determination, that kind of resilience that you have to be able to get up from that adverse situation. This book, From Surprise to Victory, was entirely on that. That is what I had mentioned, Although at one stage people were telling me, kya hoga? Well, now this whole territory will go to Pakistan, etc. But me and my colleagues and even the political leadership, we were not prepared to accept that.
Yeah. More from the sense of looking at this from an organizational perspective, sir. At the end of the day, it's some level of hierarchy, right? You have the top leadership, and then you have the mid-level, and then the bottom level, and there's a certain level of information or protocol or a rule process flow down that happens. Now, so again, using the sort of phrase that it's a man behind the gun, I'm using it metaphorically here and telling that it's all singular points of dependence, right? So let's say everything depends on the CEO or the army chief in case of this scenario. Now, even when you're having any backup plan, the backup plan also depends on a certain other singular point of dependence. From an organizational structure, do you prefer these singular points of dependence, or do you think having a more decentralized approach to this is more effective?
Look, firstly, as far as the total aim is concerned, I would say the wholesome aim. Like during Kargil War, we were told that, look, you have to undo what the Pakistanis have done.
Right.
And you have to throw them out from our territory. Okay. Now that aim has to be made clear to everyone in whichever language you want. That's the first thing that I'm saying. Now, having got that done, now it comes on we are a very large organization, Army, Navy, Air Force. Within the Army, you have, the battalion, the brigade, the division, and etc., etc. And then comes the Army headquarters. Now, each of these commanders have to be given their mission. They have to be tasked that, look, this is what I want you to do. When you give him that task, which fits into the overall strategy, then when you give him that task, you not only explain to him that this is what you have to do, but you also discuss with him, I would say, 1 or 2 up scenarios. So that he knows under what circumstances he is now putting up that fight. So you explain to him not only what he has to do, but you explain to him why he is doing it in a scenario which is 1 or 2 steps higher. Why? because he must understand that how much he's going to contribute. And when he succeeds, then you are also conveying to him that if you need to exploit your success on the task that has been given to you, you can do that. You should do that. So therefore, explaining it also is important, but it need not be entire scenario. For example, a battalion commander, you don't have to explain to him your total strategy of the war as such. He doesn't need that.
Right.
So there we have this need to know basis orders being given and consultation being done on need to know basis. But in that need to know basis, as I explained to you, depending on the task that you give to a commander, you also explain to him the slightly bigger situation on that front.
So what do you mean by exploitation of success here?
Like, for example, it happened during Kargil War. People, one of the battalion which had captured Tololing, and then another feature. So they found that the enemy had run away from the next place on the same ridge line.
Okay.
So, now the commander knew what is to be done. So he told them, he says, okay, go and occupy that area.
Okay.
So similarly, in a situation you find the enemy is weak and you are strong, our enemy is running away. And then, it's time for you, without losing time and without losing your resources or manpower, you exploit that situation. Now, that will be possible only when you have explained to him a slightly bigger picture than the task given to him.
Got it. So you're telling that the entire scenario need not be mentioned. You just let them know what the tasks are and how the scope of tasks can be expanded in the certain scenario.
Yeah.
Okay. And more on your personal experience, sir. Like, what is one thing that stands out from your life as a soldier?
Well, I joined NDA at the age of 15 and a half.
Oh, okay.
And 4 years of training, 3 years in NDA, 1 year in IMA, and then I served the army for almost 41 and a half years as a commissioned officer. So there is a lot that one learns in the army, and every step, I think the most important issue is the kind of leadership development that you have. Every rank you are being taught, you are being trained for the next rank that you may get into. Nobody knows, you may or may not get that next rank. But then if you do well, and if you are being trained for the next job. For example, a captain will be trained all the time for a major's job also. So this leadership part, it's not only amongst the officers, but even our Jawans. A last Naik to Naik, Naik to Havaldar, Havaldar to a JCO. So I think the best part is the leadership training that we have in the armed forces. And that is what gives you the confidence. That is what teaches you the kind of relationship that you have with your human resource. That you must maintain that kind of a relationship. That gives you not only professional capability, but also a good idea of being able to relate yourself with the resources, the human resource that you have got. And ultimately what succeeds is your professional competence, the circumstances in which you are placed, the wherewithal that you have, and the faith and the loyalty that you have of your own units, formation, and people.
Got it. But when you say that, let's say a captain is being trained for a major and there's always leadership training, what goes into this leadership training?
So you paint scenarios for him for the next rank. When, during the training part, whatever courses or whatever development that you train him for the kind of scenarios which a captain has to carry out as a company commander, as a major company commander. So he starts learning from that. He not only he's following somebody, but he's as a separate capsule. He's also learning on those issues.
But are these more of, let's say, mock drills, or are they more of giving more responsibility during actual operations?
You're both.
Okay.
They are both. He is being trained that if your boss, if the major company commander, it happened so many times in Kargil War. When the major company commander unfortunately got killed, his junior, he took over the situation and he then led the assaults wherever it was required. So it is both. Either you do it in peacetime, you do it in your framework, captain becomes a major, major becomes a. But in a warlike situation, suddenly it happens to you. The major company commander has got wounded, he has to be evacuated, or he's got killed. Then it is the job of the next person to take over. I mean, he doesn't need anybody's orders. It becomes automatic action.
So, sir, does the scope of military operations exist only pan borders or at the borders? Or is it also to do with, let's say, civil unrest that might be happening within the country for whatever scenario? Consider the Khalistani kind of movements that are happening at this point.
Look, difference is that in one situation, you have been given a task by the government and it's a higher level when it comes to external security. But in the internal security, you are only assisting the civil authorities.
Okay.
So you are taking over from the civil authority. That kind of, martial law, etc. We don't have it in our country. So you are assisting the civil authority, both if there is a politician, if there is a chief minister, then he and his civil administration, that he has secretary, the police people and all, you are assisting them. And sometimes when you do not have, you have a governor's rule, for example, for quite so many years, it was like that in J&K. Even today, it is the lieutenant governor who's only. So then in that case, you are assisting him and his administration. So the rules of engagement are quite different there. But when it comes to being put in a particular situation, if something happens to your organization, then you follow the same kind of system that we have in the army, that the next person will take over in case the person concerned gets killed or, he is. But all that it's a different rules of engagement you have when you are tackling whether it is Khalistanis or, I was a divisional commander in Nagaland. I was a corps commander in Punjab during insurgency terrorism days, and I also commanded a division in Kashmir. So those rules of engagement are different, but within our own system, if I am on leave, if I go away on leave, then the next person will take over and he will handle the situation.
I remember reading this one piece on the newspaper where you had mentioned, and this is, I think, in early 2000s, where you had mentioned, wait and watch and then talk with Pak. Do you still that phrase, wait and watch and then talk with Pak?
Yeah, I have always believed that, our politicians, both in India and Pakistan and even other countries, they get involved in a lot of rhetoric. And and also all kinds of sentiments and, these things and all. We have to go by the situation on the ground. Now, even after both the prime ministers had signed Lahore Declaration in 1999, February 1999, but I found the situation on the ground was not changing.
Right.
Along the line of control, the situation was not changing. So I had to tell the prime minister so many times, I said, sir, all that is fine, but the situation on the line of control remains the same, and therefore we can always expect. One day he told me, he says, why don't we stop firing against each other? So I had to tell him, I said, sir, we cannot do that, because if they continue to make effort to infiltrate into our areas, then we have no alternative except to fire at them. So that is what I mean. I am a realist. I believe in looking at the situation on the ground and then working out my own strategy or plans, whatever.
Got it. This is a question I asked to everyone on my podcast, sir. If you were a 22, 23-year-old today, basically in your younger days, what would you be doing today in 2023?
I would have loved to do what I did even now.
Okay.
22, 23 years old. I mean, that is a young age. You have so much of energy, and you have both. You want to learn as much as possible. You have your ambitions also to be able to do well in whatever you are doing, and to be able to go for the next track. I mean, I don't think I could have ever thought that I will become a chief at that age. There was no question, not even a battalion commander. But you wanted to do well and be counted as one of the good officers of the unit. So I have loved my profession. I continue to love that, and I continue to believe in that. And I still feel that, the kind of adventurous spirit that we had, and that can be satisfied when you are in military.
Right.
These are the kind of issues. I loved my uniform, and I loved the most. I think I loved was people saluting you, which doesn't happen so often in civil. So those are the kind of things that I like, and I am very satisfied that I have lived that kind of life.
So speaking of adventure spirit, how has life changed after retirement? Because naturally the level of activity will come down.
Yeah, that's true. I still love to go to the mountains. I may not be able to climb as much as I, earlier days, but I love to spend some time in the mountains. I love to travel even today. I love to meet different kind of people, different situations, So those aspects haven't changed, although to the extent that I was capable of doing it at that time. For example, there was no road at that time between Kullu and Manali. And beyond that, I took my scooter to Kullu and parked it there. And then I went on foot over Rohtang Pass on the other side of Rohtang Pass. I'm talking of 1963.
Oh, wow.
So, these are the kind of particular place. Somebody said that, look, nobody has climbed this peak in Ladakh. So we said, okay, I will do it one day. And when you went there, you found now you wanted to leave your something behind, that I have climbed this about 18,000 feet, whatever it was. So you started looking around as to what can I leave behind here. That is the kind of adventurous spirit. Now that I may not be able to do it today, but that kind of adventure I still like.
Nice. And what is one piece of advice you would give to any youngster or an aspiring soldier?
Look, firstly, today we are in a situation which is quite different to what it was. Today there are a lot of opportunities. There is so much to learn, not only academics, but also there is so much opportunity to work on. India is a totally different situation, and it is moving forward. The kind of obstacle that we had, the kind of restrictions that we had when we were young, they are no longer applicable today. So therefore, you are in a situation where you can pursue what you like and pursue it in a manner that people are prepared to give you help also. And therefore, what you like, where you are happy, pursue that, which will give you happiness. And you do not have to restrict yourself in a particular silo or in a particular bind. And ultimate aim should be your happiness, your development as a good human being, and to be able to prove to others that you have something more than an average person.
And one last question, sir. What motivates you even today, and what brings you to this conversation with me? Because this is unexpected.
Krishna, I have not sat down idle person after my retirement. I retired more than 22 years ago now. And I have continued to do something because I feel that certain amount of physical activity as well as mental activity, it keeps you going it also makes you feel younger. You know, I knew that you were much younger than me, and I was quite keen to have an interaction with you because I can then assess what kind of thinking that our young people have today.
And what is your assessment?
So I'm not assessing you at the moment, but
Okay.
I'm happy. I'm glad the kind of question that you have that gives me a lot of satisfaction. So I have been on the boards of companies. I have been lecturing in universities and schools. I've done a lot of NGO work and a board of company as an independent director. And so I have kept myself adequately busy. I travel a lot. I love travel even today. And I've given a lot of corporate lectures on strategic issues, on security issues, on management issues. And I have enjoyed it. I have enjoyed my life.
Yeah, that's such a fulfilling statement to hear.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, thanks a lot for being on this podcast. Okay, sir, one last question. Do you have a certain fitness regime?
Yes, I do have. For example, I go out even today at my age. I go out in the morning for 1 hour walk, and sometimes in the evening also when you have the time. And so that is part of my fitness regime. And walking in the morning and sometimes in the evening. And I occasionally I have played golf. Now, not those strenuous games like squash and other games like I used to do earlier in my younger days. But this kind of, I'm not so much into yoga, but I do some stretch exercises morning and evening.
Okay.
And I also am careful about my food.
Oh, okay.
You know, that is an important issue. Again, you have to be careful of your caloric intake as well as the kind of drinking or eating that you do.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks a lot for this very insightful and giving a placing a magnifying glass through your journey, sir. Totally enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for being on my show, sir.
Thank you, Krishna. Thanks a lot. Wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, sir.